She said he was just a distraction, but when she looked at me, I knew she was lying. I wasn't supposed to be there. The invitation came from an old college friend, a weekend art retreat tucked away in the hills, filled with painters, writers, and dreamers who spoke a language I hadn't used in years. I told myself I was going for inspiration, but deep down, I just needed silence, the kind that doesn't judge you for being lost. The retreat house smelled of turpentine, coffee, and something faintly sweet, like old paper and citrus. Sunlight poured through high windows, warming the wooden floors and scattering across half-finished canvases. People talked in soft tones, their laughter echoing against the walls. And then I saw her. She stood near the far wall, examining a large oil painting with the sort of focus that silences a room without trying to. Her name, I'd later learn, was Elena, the lead curator who had come to observe creative progress, though everything about her suggested she was the real artist there. She was older than most, maybe early 40s. Her hair, dark with streaks of silver near the temples, was tied back loosely, and a single wisp brushed her cheek when she turned. There was no trace of insecurity in her, only calm control, as if she'd learned to trust her own silence more than other people's noise. When I first caught her looking at my sketch pad, I straightened instinctively, the way a student does when the teacher walks in. She didn't smile, just tilted her head slightly, her gaze moving from the pencil in my hand to the unfinished portrait on the page. "You're hiding behind the lines," she said, voice low and deliberate. I blinked. Saw the... She stepped closer, the faint scent of sandalwood and coffee following her. "You draw like someone who's afraid to be seen." Her tone wasn't cruel, just precise, as if she were stating a truth that needed no defense. And then, before I could think of a reply, she walked away, leaving me staring at the smudge of charcoal where her words had landed. The rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way her eyes lingered just a second longer than polite conversation allowed, about the quiet confidence in her voice, how it could cut through the chatter of the room and still sound like music. That night, while others gathered around a fire outside, I sat alone in the studio. Every line I drew reminded me of her, that calm defiance, that quiet strength. I didn't know it then, but something in me had already begun to shift. Elena wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't need to be. She was the kind of person who could unravel you with a single sentence, and somehow, you'd thank her for it. The next evening, the air smelled like rain before it even began. The retreat had quieted down. Most of the artists were inside, packing up supplies or huddling around half-finished canvases. I lingered near the veranda, pretending to sketch the horizon, but mostly just thinking about her. Elena. She had been in my head all day, her words replaying on a loop. "You draw like someone who's afraid to be seen." It wasn't an insult, but it hit deeper than any critique I'd ever received. Because she was right. I had been hiding, not just in art, but in life. She appeared again just as the rain began. A faint drizzle, cool and steady. She carried 2 mugs of tea, steam curling around her fingers. Without a word, she handed me one. "Still hiding?" she asked, sitting beside me on the wooden bench. Her tone was light, teasing, but her eyes, soft gray, clear even in the dim light, carried that same quiet depth. I tried to sound confident. "Depends on who's looking." She smirked. "So you admit it." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that's strangely comfortable. The sound of raindrops hitting the tin roof filled the spaces between our breaths. She leaned back, watching the horizon as the clouds blurred into the hills. "You know," she said finally, "most people come here to impress others. But you look like you came to remember something." I laughed under my breath. Maybe I came to forget. That made her glance at me. Not a long look, just enough to unsettle my heartbeat. Her lips curved slightly. Forgetting and hiding aren't the same thing. Her words lingered in the air. I wanted to ask what she was trying to forget, but something told me she wasn't ready to answer, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Instead, I said the first thing that came to mind. "You always talk like that." "Like what?" "Like you've already lived 3 lives and learned all the lessons the rest of us are still fumbling through." That made her laugh, a low, effortless sound that somehow made the air warmer. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the motion graceful and unhurried. "Maybe I've just stopped pretending not to know myself," she said softly. Her hand brushed against mine on the bench, not deliberate, not accidental either. Just a momentary connection that sent a quiet shock through me. The rain picked up, pattering harder now, and she stood. "You should get inside, before your tea gets cold." I wanted to ask her to stay. I didn't. As she turned, the lamplight caught her face, soft, calm, unreadable. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't mysterious because she hid things. She was mysterious because she felt everything and refused to explain any of it. By the third day, the retreat felt different. The rhythm of the place, quiet mornings, long afternoons, the smell of acrylics and coffee, had begun to seep into me. But so had she, Elena. I'd see her moving from easel to easel, stopping beside different artists, offering quiet guidance. Her presence carried weight, steady, graceful, composed. Yet every time our eyes met, there was a flicker of something she didn't say, something she didn't want to say. And then there was Leah, younger, energetic, always laughing too loud, her paint-stained hands waving midair as she told stories about everything and nothing. She was the kind of person who could make a room look brighter just by entering it. And, unfortunately, she decided that I was going to be her new best friend. At first, I didn't mind. Leah was kind, easy to talk to, and her energy filled the awkward silences I didn't know how to break. But every time I caught Elena glancing our way, that easy comfort turned complicated. She'd look at us with that same calm expression, polite, distant, but her eyes told a different story. They held questions she'd never ask, and maybe didn't want the answers to. That afternoon, Leah insisted on showing me her new painting, a wild, abstract swirl of reds and blues. She laughed as she tugged me by the hand toward her easel. "Come on, you've been too serious all day." Her fingers were warm around mine, and just then I noticed Elena nearby, her gaze cutting across the room for half a second. No words, just a quiet tightening of her jaw before she turned away. Leah didn't notice, but I did. When the session ended, I found Elena outside near the old stone wall, watching the sky shift to dusk. She didn't turn when she heard me approach, just said, "She's good for you. Bring some color into your gray." I smiled faintly. "You sound jealous." That made her look at me, finally. Her smirk returned, but this time there was something behind it. Something sharper. "She's just a distraction," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "You're the real problem." The words hit harder than they should have. I laughed softly, trying to play it off. "A problem, huh? That's new." She crossed her arms, eyes glinting in the fading light. "You make people forget the rules, and that's dangerous." I wanted to ask which rules, but her tone, the low, trembling control in it, told me she wasn't talking about art anymore. A breeze moved through the courtyard, lifting a few strands of her hair. I almost reached to tuck them back, but I stopped myself. We just stood there, close enough to feel the tension between what we wanted and what we shouldn't. Then she turned away. "Go back inside," she murmured, "before I forget the rules too." I didn't. I just watched her walk away, that calm, composed stride. And for the first time, I realized how much control it must take to look that calm when your heart isn't. That night, the air outside carried the smell of rain-soaked pine and something softer, the lingering quiet that follows too many unsaid words. The retreat house had gone silent. Most of the guests were asleep, their laughter and footsteps replaced by the distant hum of the lake beyond the trees. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling her. Elena's smirk, her words, that strange ache I couldn't name. So I stepped outside, hoping the night air would quiet my mind. I found her there. She stood by the lake, a shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her reflection rippling in the dark water. The moonlight caught the edge of her face, sharp, serene, beautiful in that effortless way only time can teach. For a moment, I just watched. The stillness between us was fragile, like glass. She didn't turn when I approached. "Couldn't sleep?" "Not really," I said. "You?" A small laugh. "Sleep's a stranger these days." I stepped beside her, keeping a careful distance. The night was cool, and the lake shimmered like spilled silver. "Elena," I said quietly, "what did you mean earlier, when you said I'm the real problem?" She looked down at the water, her voice low. "It means you make it hard to stay numb." The words hit deeper than I expected. "Numb." She exhaled slowly, watching her breath vanish into the night. You reach a certain age and realize it's easier not to feel too much. Easier to admire beauty from a distance than risk touching it and breaking something. I said nothing, just listened. She went on, her tone softer now. "People think confidence means you're fearless. It doesn't. It just means you've learned to carry your fear quietly." Her honesty disarmed me. I turned toward her, searching her face, the faint lines around her eyes, the steadiness of her gaze, the loneliness hiding beneath it. "Elena," I murmured, "you don't have to carry it alone." She smiled faintly, sad but real. "That's what scares me." The breeze shifted. Her shawl slipped slightly off her shoulder, and without thinking, I reached out to adjust it. My fingers brushed against her skin, warm, alive, trembling slightly. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world felt suspended, just the sound of the lake, the moonlight on her cheek, and the quiet thud of two hearts trying to remember their rhythm. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't get close to me." Her voice wasn't stern, it was pleading. But she didn't step back either. Her hand lingered on my wrist for a second longer than reason would allow, her thumb grazing my skin like an apology. And then she let go. We stood there, not as artist and observer, not as two people divided by years, but as two souls on the edge of something that neither of us was ready to name. When she finally walked away, I didn't follow. I just stayed there by the lake, her warmth still clinging faintly to my hand, wondering if connection was ever meant to feel this fragile and this inevitable. The morning after our walk felt colder than it should have. Not in the weather, in the space between us. Elena was different. Where she used to greet me with a knowing glance or quiet smile, she now moved through the studio with the precision of someone who had rebuilt her walls overnight. She spoke to everyone, offered advice, gave critiques, but never once looked in my direction for longer than a heartbeat. It shouldn't have mattered. We hadn't promised anything, hadn't crossed any forbidden line. And yet, every second of her silence felt like a punishment I didn't understand. I tried to focus on my sketchbook, on the way the light hit the glass jars by the window, on the sound of brushes clinking in water cups. But everything reminded me of her. The scent of her shawl that still lingered in the hallway. The echo of her voice, quiet and sharp in my memory. At lunch, I caught her sitting with Leah. The two of them laughing, heads bent close over canvas. It should have looked natural. It didn't. There was a tightness in her smile, the kind that hides exhaustion behind charm. I stayed quiet, watching from across the courtyard, feeling ridiculous. I wasn't a teenager nursing a crush. I was a grown man who couldn't stop thinking about a woman who clearly didn't want to be thought of. That evening, when the retreat emptied out for dinner, I stayed behind. The studio was nearly dark, only a few lamps left on. I pulled out my sketch pad and began to draw. Not a landscape this time, not a portrait from imagination. Her, the way the light curved across her cheekbones, the faint crease near her mouth when she smirked, the calm weight of her gaze. I drew until the page became something alive, not a likeness, but a feeling. I didn't hear her come in. "Elena," I said, startled. She stood behind me, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Her eyes flicked to the drawing, and for a moment I saw something soften, something that didn't belong to her calm, curated self. "You see too much," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. I tried to explain. "It's not just a sketch," but she shook her head. "That's the problem." She turned to leave. I reached out instinctively, stopping just short of touching her. "Why are you running from something you started?" Her hand hesitated on the doorframe. "Because it's easier to miss what never happened." And then she was gone. The room felt heavier without her, the air thicker, the silence louder. I looked down at the drawing, still wet with graphite smudges, and realized it was the truest thing I'd ever made. Not because it looked like her, but because it hurt like her, quiet, deliberate, and impossible to forget. The last morning arrived too soon. Suitcases lined the hallway, the smell of turpentine replaced by coffee and the faint melancholy that always comes with goodbyes. The retreat was ending, but the silence between us still hadn't lifted. I told myself I'd leave without saying anything, that some connections aren't meant to be resolved. They're just meant to stay suspended, like unfinished sketches. But when I saw her alone in the studio, cleaning brushes at the sink, that plan dissolved. Elena's back was turned. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and streaks of sunlight fell across her arms. The way she moved, slow, deliberate, graceful, made it feel like she was painting even when she wasn't. I stood at the door for a while, unsure what to say. Then I finally spoke. "You're leaving without saying goodbye." She froze, then set down the brush. "Goodbyes are unnecessary. They make things heavier than they already are." I stepped inside. Maybe heavy things are worth carrying sometimes. She looked over her shoulder, eyes tired but warm. "You don't give up easily, do you? Not when something feels real." That made her smile faintly, the kind of smile that breaks you just by existing. "You shouldn't mistake intensity for meaning," she said softly. I shook my head. "I'm not. You made me feel seen. That doesn't happen often." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "That's not something I meant to do." "Maybe not," I said, stepping closer, "but you did." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft drip of water from the brushes. I could see her struggling, torn between reason and feeling. Finally, she sighed, leaning against the counter. "Do you know why I push you away?" I waited. "Because it scared me," she whispered. "The way you look at me. Like I'm someone worth knowing again." The words landed somewhere deep. I took a careful step forward, close enough to feel her presence, but not to touch. "Maybe you are." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since I met her, I saw her vulnerability, raw, unguarded, beautiful. When she opened them again, she smiled through the ache. "You're too young to be saying things like that," she murmured. "And you're too wise to believe they don't matter," I replied. She laughed quietly, almost tearfully. Then, after a pause, she reached out and placed her hand on my chest, light, trembling. Her palm rested over my heart, as if she was checking whether it was real. "Maybe that's what scared me," she whispered. "You still believe in things I've stopped believing in." I wanted to hold her, to keep that moment from ending. But she withdrew her hand gently, her touch leaving behind the ghost of warmth. "Goodbye," she said finally, not coldly, not sadly, just honestly. And as she walked past me, I realized some goodbyes aren't endings. They're the moment you finally understand what someone meant to you. 2 weeks had passed since the retreat ended. The world outside felt louder now. Traffic, deadlines, chatter, all the things that used to fill the silence I once craved. But now, silence reminded me of her, of Elena. I tried not to think about her, but she was everywhere, in the brush of sunlight on my desk, in the faint scent of coffee that lingered each morning, in the way my pencil hesitated before touching paper. Every drawing felt empty without that quiet voice in the back of my head saying, "You're hiding behind the lines." She had left without looking back. No contact, no message, no trace of where she'd gone. Just absence, clean, deliberate, and painfully elegant. Then one afternoon, as I returned home, I found a small package resting against my door. No return address, just my name, written in her handwriting, steady, deliberate, familiar. Inside was a simple wooden frame, and inside that frame, my sketch of her, the one she had left on the table without a word. Except now, it wasn't just my work anymore. She'd drawn over it. Faint, delicate brushstrokes of color laid across the graphite lines. Nothing dramatic, just small touches, warmth where there had been gray, softness where there had been restraint. Tucked behind the frame was a note. Just one line. I stopped hiding behind the lines. I didn't move for a long time. My thumb traced the edge of the paper. My heart caught somewhere between gratitude and ache. She hadn't said she missed me. She hadn't said goodbye, but she didn't need to. That single sentence was everything. It was her way of saying that our connection, brief as it was, had changed her too. That night, I opened the window. The city lights flickered below, and the cool wind brushed against my face. I set her framed sketch on the windowsill, the glow from the street lamps spilling softly across it. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that hollow quiet. I felt peace, the kind that comes when you realize not every story needs to end with holding hands or confessions. Some just end with understanding. She had once told me that forgetting was easier than feeling. But I think she knew, in the end, that we never really forget the people who teach us how to see ourselves. And maybe that was the point. Elena didn't stay. She wasn't supposed to. She walked into my life like a brushstroke across a blank page, brief, deliberate, irreversible. I looked at her framed sketch once more, smiled faintly, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for seeing me." The wind carried the words out the window, disappearing into the night. And for the first time, I didn't need to know if she heard them. Because somewhere, I knew she already had.